In 1982, a California Highway Patrol officer pulled a young woman over for speeding. He bullied her into sex and then killed her. He then used a decade of police experience to try to cover up his crime and convince local investigators of his innocence. But would he get away with it?
Society depends on trust and authority. It's a system that works, and because it works, we hardly think about it. A uniformed officer demands respect, and we willingly comply. But what if that trust were betrayed? What if a police officer abuses his authority? George Gwaltney was one such cop. The popular and decorated California Highway Patrol officer committed the ultimate violation. He murdered. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. When good cops go bad, the full power of law enforcement rallies to repair the damage, rebuild the trust, and deliver justice. The Gwaltney case taxed the resources of both state police and the FBI. He was a cunning adversary, trained in crime solving, and he knew how to cover his tracks.
23-year-old Robin Bishop had left her home in Las Vegas to visit a friend in Los Angeles.
But then you gotta carry trays, so you gotta work on yours.
Robin had hopes of becoming an actress. Her friend convinced her that if she was serious about acting, she had to move to LA.
Okay, let's see.
Robin headed back to Vegas to pack up and make the move. She was excited about her future. In Barstow, California, she stopped to call her mother and get a sandwich. Returning to her car, she fell under the gaze of a predator, California Highway Patrolman George Gwaltney. Though he was a highly respected officer and member of the community, Gwaltney had a secret history of stopping women for speeding and then soliciting them for sex in exchange for getting out of a ticket. The night of January 11th, 1982 was no different. He quickly memorized the make and model of her car. He also noticed the Nevada license plate. Next, Gwaltney saw a neighborhood boy he knew, a boy who, if necessary, could be used as a convenient alibi.
Hey, Preston, you want a ride?
He picked up Preston Olson and gave him a ride home. A former winner of the Officer of the Year award, Gwaltney was well known for such kind actions. Barstow parents trusted Gwaltney to keep a protective eye on their children. He dropped Preston off at his house and said hello to his parents. By now, the young woman whom Gwaltney had targeted would be well out of town, headed toward Nevada on Interstate 15. The ordinarily well-traveled highway was unusually quiet. He caught up with her on the empty highway east of Barstow. He turned on his light and siren and pulled her over. Robin Bishop had a string of tickets for speeding. She had in fact just finished a year of probation and had been given a warning that another ticket would cost her her license. Robin knew that a car and a driver's license would be essential for an aspiring actress in Los Angeles.
Okay, man. Do you have any idea how fast you were going?
Pretty bad.
Just a little bit too fast. I'm gonna have to ask for your license, man. Okay, Robin, I'm going to have to ask you to get out of the vehicle and follow me back to my squad car.
She left the keys in the ignition and her purse in the car.
Let's take a little walk back to the squad car.
Robin was probably surprised to be taken back to the patrol car, but she obeyed. Unfortunately, Gwaltney had more than a speeding ticket in mind.
Go ahead and turn around for chance on your head. I'm going to have to tap the kick in.
For speeding?
Yep, that's the law.
I was just speeding.
Gwaltney stood her up against the patrol car and handcuffed her. As he put her into his back seat, she must have been scared and confused. Why the handcuffs? Where was he taking her? Gwaltney returned to her car to get her purse. At that moment, a car with a lone driver passed by. Gwaltney retrieved the purse, returned to his car, and pulled away, leaving her car abandoned on the interstate shoulder. He drove Robin to an exit that led to a seldom-used access road running parallel to the highway. It was a place he often went to take a break during his patrol shift. A secluded lookout point where he could observe the highway some 400 feet away, clearly from all directions. There, holding the threat of jail or loss of license over her, Gwaltney raped Robin Bishop. When he was done with her, he radioed in a wants and warrants check on Robin's car as if it were abandoned. He knew he'd been spotted walking towards Robin's empty car.
Yeah, I'd like to report a 2829. Yeah, license number 561 FBD.
It was the first in a long line of lies covering his actions for the official record.
Copy that.
He drove her down the parallel access road to a point where Robin could walk back to her car. He removed the cuffs and let her out of the car. Things were working out for Gwaltney. He'd gotten what he was after and was simply going to let her go. But as she sat on the ground to put on her boots, something happened. Perhaps anger replaced fear now that she was released. Perhaps she threatened him with exposure. Her brother was a prosecutor in Nevada. Regardless, it would be her word against his. But then, as he stood next to his vehicle, he was suddenly caught in the spotlight of a passing deputy sheriff's car. The deputy may well have noticed Gwaltney's patrol car from the highway nearby. Gwaltney could not know whether he had been recognized. Suddenly, Robin's threats became more real. How could he explain being out there on the access road? In a moment of panic, Officer George Gwaltney decided Robin had to be silenced. Gwaltney took a final and irrevocable step. Now, there was no way to distance himself from the dead girl. Frantic, he devised a way out. He called the dispatcher and reported finding a dead body, a possible suicide. Knowing he had only moments before other officers would arrive at the scene, he searched under her head for the bullet that had killed her. As evidence, the bullet had the power to destroy him, but there was no exit wound. Homicide Detective Milt Rose of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department was sent to investigate the dead body found by Gwaltney. On his way to the crime scene, the dispatcher asked that he examine the abandoned car. As the body had been found a short distance away on the access road and was visible to investigators already at the crime scene, the police suspected there was a connection between the car and the body.
I did not see any obvious signs of any malfunctions. No mechanical breakdowns. The tires were all in good condition. The vehicle was in gear. The keys were inside the vehicle. Why did the vehicle stop at the location it was at?
At the crime scene, Officer Gwaltney was now composed and professional. He described how he found the victim, checked for a pulse, and looked in her purse for identification. The Nevada vehicle registration and driver's license identified her as Robin Bishop, owner of the abandoned car he had called in earlier. Although Officer Gwaltney had reported an apparent suicide, Detective Rose quickly ruled out that possibility. The victim had been shot in the back of the head at close range, then moved slightly. 4 inches from her head was a stream of blood on the ground. Clearly, this was a homicide. Recent rainfall made tracks and footprints from Gwaltney and his cruiser clearly visible in the damp sand.
In this general area, we found a couple of footprints that came around, appear to come around the front of the vehicle. They travel around in the front of the vehicle and off in a direction sorted towards the middle area of the vehicle. We travel over here into an area about where this bush is located, or right in this general area, and that's where Robin Bishop's body was found. The other footprints that we found were leading from the driver's door on the Highway Patrol unit to an area towards the front of the vehicle and then over towards Robin's body, kind of facing off in the easterly direction.
The first officer arriving on the scene criticized Gwaltney for the profusion of his footprints, a clear contamination of the crime scene and uncharacteristically sloppy work.
Why are you going to do this? You need to come to the crime scene.
Further examination, I noticed what appeared to be marks on her wrist.
The marks were familiar to any police officer. 2 thin marks across the top of her wrist and 1 across the bottom, typical of those made by handcuffs. Then, when Detective Rose examined the contents of the victim's purse, he could find no signs of robbery, but the vehicle registration and driver's license were lying on top of the purse's contents, as if they'd been shown to someone and quickly thrown back into the purse.
It indicated to me that we needed to take a look at some type of vehicle stop where somebody in some type of position of authority possibly stopped this car.
To Rose, the evidence pointed to the involvement of a police officer or someone posing as one. Every investigator at the crime scene was either a friend or a colleague of Officer Gwaltney. That he might be connected with the crime was not even considered at this point. An autopsy was performed. The results confirmed that the body had been moved slightly after being shot, and that the bruises were in fact made by handcuffs. The fatal bullet was found lodged in Robin's jaw. Though it was the caliber of a standard police service revolver, the brand was not the standard ammunition. The autopsy also showed that she had had sex within 24 hours of her death, but there were none of the normal physical signs of a forcible rape.
The first thing we needed to do was to eliminate people that had been to the scene or could have been in the area. Other highway patrol officers, other deputies, whoever was in that particular area around that time frame. We needed to start with Officer Gwaltney to begin with, because Officer Gwaltney was a person who found the body.
Gwaltney's survival depended on staying one step ahead of the investigation. When he finished his shift that night, he struggled to remove the gun barrel from the murder weapon. It was the one piece of hard evidence that could conclusively implicate him in the crime. Gwaltney knew his gun barrel left identifiable markings on the bullet that killed Robin Bishop. The next morning, he went to a local gun shop to order a new barrel, which would confuse a ballistics test. But the barrel was not in stock and had to be ordered. Then he took his uniform to the dry cleaner and his holster to the repair shop for re-dyeing and restitching. All that remained was to stall for time until the gun barrel arrived. In Barstow, Rose held a briefing that morning with the police and sheriff departments to discuss the case. He asked all officers on duty the night before to turn in their weapons so that ballistics tests could eliminate them as possible suspects in the crime. Gwaltney made sure to attend. During the briefing, he learned that the fatal bullet had been recovered. By early evening, Gwaltney was the only officer who had not turned in his weapon for testing. The detectives went to his home and asked for his service revolver. He returned moments later with the wrong gun, his off-duty weapon.
George, this isn't your service revolver, and that's what we need.
Oh, yeah. Service. I mean, everyone else.
The captain sent him back for his service revolver, but he returned empty-handed.
You aren't going to believe this, but it's been stolen.
What do you mean stolen?
Well, there's
George,
been some burglaries in the
He claimed
neighborhood.
that his house must have been burglarized. The gun was missing.
have to ask for your.
The story sounded doubtful,
This is a formality.
but because Gwaltney was a highway patrol officer, Detective Brian English with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department was inclined to believe him.
I kind of empathized with him because we were, in my opinion, we were looking for evidence to show that he didn't do it. It was some criminal that did it. You know.
Gwaltney agreed to come to headquarters for questioning. But first, the detectives searched his locker for the missing weapon. They found nothing.
Then we sat down and we started talking with Officer Gwaltney. And to him, it didn't appear important that his gun was gone, which was very significant. And if I was in his position, I'd been extremely worried, and it didn't seem to bother him.
By now, it was almost 2 days after the crime. The missing weapon and Gwaltney's odd behavior made it impossible to deny the obvious. Gwaltney was advised of his constitutional rights. Although this made him the primary suspect in the case, there was insufficient evidence to actually arrest him. Insisting he was innocent, Gwaltney agreed to give a tape-recorded interview.
That we can record on tape about the night that Robin was shot. Yeah, I have no problem with that.
He said he'd worked his regular beat patrolling the interstate on January 11th.
And I came across the dust B210.
After his dinner break, he had picked up a young boy he knew, Preston Olson, whom he had seen walking home alone. After dropping Preston off at his house, he was by 8:50 p.m. back on the interstate. About 9:15, he found the abandoned car, ran a stolen vehicle check, then turned onto the access road. Seeing a pale shape, he had pulled over. It was the body of the victim, Robin Bishop.
He was not reacting normally for a person who had been accused of committing this kind of a crime. Had it been me, I would not be talking to them. I'd tell them to prove it. I'd be very irate. I'd be very upset.
Officer Gwaltney had repeatedly insisted on taking a lie detector test. He reiterated his statement and then answered a series of critical questions, including the direct question, had he killed Robin Bishop?
No.
The examiner could find no sign of deception in the polygraph exam. Gwaltney had just crossed another hurdle in his cover-up.
We transported George from the Barstow station back down to San Bernardino for the questioning. At that time, George gave his consent to go ahead and search his house.
Sheriff's deputies investigated Gwaltney's claim that his house must have been burglarized, but they could find no sign of forced entry. The homicide detectives then began their work. At dawn, they found the frame of a Smith & Wesson Model 19 .357 Magnum revolver inside Gwaltney's truck. The frame was badly damaged with tool marks. It appeared to have been dismantled by someone who had no knowledge of how to take it apart.
The barrel, which would have been used for a ballistics comparison, was gone. Therefore, there's no ballistics match could be done.
The gun frame was registered to George Michael Gwaltney. To the detectives, it had been dismantled for only one purpose. Gwaltney was placed under arrest. But the evidence was still only circumstantial. A link between the revolver and the tools used to dismantle it had to be found. The detectives returned to Gwaltney's home for another search. Evidence was collected. Gripping-type tools and a pipe vise found behind the garage that showed fresh signs of metal transfer. In the bedroom closet, detectives found 5 boxes of bullets bearing the CHP insignia. In the boxes among the standard police rounds, they found 27 bullets of another brand. 357 caliber 158 grain soft points made by Remington Arms, the same kind of bullet that killed Robin Bishop. Gwaltney's wife was in a state of shock and disbelief. When questioned, she assured the detectives again and again that George had not been acting strangely or in any way different lately. He was a good husband and a good father to their children.
He's a wonderful husband, a very caring father.
News of Gwaltney's arrest stunned the small community of Barstow. His fellow officers had known and respected him for decades. Despite the considerable evidence against Gwaltney, they were unable to accept his possible guilt.
Pretty dramatic and emotional thing when another law enforcement officer is accused of committing a murder.
Most of the people knew George, and they could not believe that George Gwaltney could have done something so bad.
I recall a couple of the officers that were close friends of his were in tears when I was interviewing them because they didn't want to believe that George could do this.
Even the investigators struggled to come to grips with the conclusion they had been forced to draw.
My feeling was, he didn't do it. He couldn't do it. He's a highway patrolman.
But the evidence continued to mount. Semen was found in the backseat of Gwaltney's cruiser and in Robin's jeans. A critical report was filed by Sheriff's Deputy Roger Kaufman, who had been out of town the days following the crime and had only just learned of Gwaltney's arrest. He described driving by the exact crime scene area about the time of the murder. From the interstate, he spotted a car's parking lights on the little-used access road. Shining his spotlight on the car, he saw an officer standing by it, but was driving too fast to identify him. Barely minutes later, he heard a very upset Gwaltney calling in a possible suicide on the radio. He'd been surprised to hear Gwaltney, a man known for his unshakable presence, sounding so agitated, but had not given the incident any thought until he learned of the arrest. As the investigation progressed, it became apparent that Gwaltney had used his knowledge of investigative procedure to thwart detectives' efforts to collect evidence against him. His uniform had been dry cleaned, his holster re-dyed and re-stitched, allegedly for an upcoming inspection. Any evidence of blood or tissue transferred from the gun had been destroyed. His footprints had altered the crime scene. When detectives questioned the owners of gun stores in the area, on the theory Gwaltney would have tried to buy a replacement barrel for his service revolver, none could recall him being in their stores. After several months of an internal investigation, Gwaltney was fired from the California Highway Patrol.
Okay, bye.
Now convinced that he had committed the worst imaginable crime, detectives were still unable to prove Gwaltney was lying. His wife and friends still solidly supported him. 9 months later, the trial began, with prosecutor Betty Kennedy confident that the considerable evidence, though mostly circumstantial, was strong enough to result in a quick conviction. In his opening statement, defense attorney George Porter told the jury that George Michael Gwaltney was the victim of a frame-up, possibly by someone in his own department. Someone stopped Miss Bishop, as he would show, but it was not George Gwaltney. The defense produced a key witness, railroad worker Dennis Gubler, who testified that he had passed Robin Bishop's empty car on the highway shoulder that night. A light-colored car was parked 50 feet behind it. Gubler described to the jury a man carrying a flashlight who was approaching Bishop's car. His description, however, seemed to eliminate Gwaltney as the man he saw. Other suspects, Porter contended, must be considered. The prosecution constructed a precise and elaborate timeline for the jury, from Robin's final phone call to her mother in Barstow to Gwaltney's radio call reporting the discovery of her body. The timeline included all of Gwaltney's known actions and time for the murder as well. The prosecution believed its case was bulletproof. Travel times, the pickup of the Olsen boy, the deputy's sighting, the radio calls, everything. But Gwaltney's attorney countered by producing dozens of witnesses, CHP colleagues and personal friends who testified to his impeccable character and record. He used the timeline itself to cast doubt on the series of events. Could Gwaltney possibly have had enough time, barely 20 minutes, to do all he was accused of? The defense easily challenged the scientific analysis of the semen samples from the car and the victim. The technology for using DNA in the courtroom was still 6 years in the future. In addition, Porter was able to cast doubt on the prosecution's inconclusive tool mark analysis of the gun frame and tools taken from Gwaltney's vehicle and residence. Nevertheless, the prosecution believed the bullet evidence and the dismantled gun frame would be enough to convince the jury.
The strongest evidence that we had in the particular case was the frame of the gun. How can you explain the frame? How can you explain why it was in the vehicle? Why was it taken apart? Why was the barrel missing? Why was the cylinder missing? The grips, the hammer, the trigger? Why?
Gwaltney was prepared and polished, providing the defense with its best witness, himself.
He had an answer for everything that was questioned to him. And every answer he had was feasible. And what their defense tactic was to put a small amount of doubt into each one of the items of evidence that we presented. And that's what they did. And George did an excellent job of tying up all the loose ends when he testified.
In the end, the testimony of 50 witnesses in 30 areas of expertise and all the accumulated evidence failed to convince the local jury. After 4 days, a deadlock was declared, 8-4 in favor of acquittal. George Gwaltney was a free man.
Nothing is, as some people say, a slam dunk. And you never know which way the jury's going to go. You never know which evidence the judge is going to let in and which evidence the judge won't let in. So, because I wasn't involved in the daily routine, I was very much surprised that George was not found guilty.
We spoke to a number of the jurors, and a few of the jurors thought there was a good possibility George was the one responsible, but they couldn't believe he actually did it. And if he did do it, he was a highway patrolman. He worked hard. He worked for the community. He was respected. We just couldn't find him guilty.
Still believing George Gwaltney was guilty, prosecutors were determined to get a conviction. Less than 1 year after the mistrial, Gwaltney was tried again in Superior Court. But with little new evidence presented, the trial ended in another deadlocked jury, 7-5 in favor of acquittal. George Gwaltney walked away, seemingly out of reach of the law.
I was stunned. I sat around for several hours just thinking about it, rehashing what could have we done to change the outcome. What could we do if and when there's another trial?
Arguing the appearance of harassment, the judge denied prosecutors a third trial. It appeared that George Gwaltney could not be brought to justice in the town of Barstow.
We felt, and I was convinced, that George killed this lady and that we needed someone to come in and prosecute George. George needed to pay for what happened.
From the moment of Gwaltney's arrest, the FBI had been watching this case with great interest. Anytime a homicide involving a police officer takes place, the FBI monitors the investigation. After Gwaltney was acquitted a second time, there was enormous public pressure to find the truth surrounding Robin Bishop's murder. The FBI's Los Angeles field office decided it was time to intervene. The FBI knew that George Gwaltney could never be tried again for Robin Bishop's murder in the state of California. But in a federal court, he could be charged with violating her civil rights. By killing Robin Bishop while he was on duty, George Gwaltney had committed a federal crime. By taking her life, he had violated her civil rights. This had never been argued in a criminal trial before. But the FBI and federal prosecutors believed the Bishop murder was a perfect test case. The case was assigned to Special Agent Michael Randolph.
Gwaltney was like a wolf in the sheep pen. The local law enforcement didn't know that he was the perpetrator. He was the person that had committed the murder, so he would stay one step ahead of them, destroying evidence. And this is a significant reason that the locals were unsuccessful in their prosecution. They didn't realize what they were dealing with.
Exhaustively reviewing the crime scene photographs, Agent Randolph's attention was caught by a photo. It revealed the contents of the trunk of Gwaltney's patrol car the night of the murder. In it, he spotted a small box of ammunition. He sent the photos off for enlargement and analysis.
We were notified by the FBI laboratory that photographic analysis revealed that that was a box of .357 Magnum ammunition and was in fact illegal ammo of the type that Gwaltney had testified he did not carry and was not carrying the night of the murder. It was also, we believe, the same box of ammo that was collected from his house.
Agent Randolph had just caught George Gwaltney in his first lie.
We knew that he had lied about one thing at the two local trials. There had to be other things that he had lied about.
Working closely with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department and the California Highway Patrol, Agent Randolph began re-examining virtually all of the evidence from the first two state trials.
Instead of handling it as a usual criminal investigation, we took an exhaustive approach, sort of like a TWA Flight 800 approach. Every rivet had to be looked at, every rock had to be looked at.
The mountain of reports, transcripts, photos, and physical evidence would be painstakingly re-examined by the FBI labs and Bureau field agents.
Key things that were used that we sent back to the lab would include such things as, obviously, the frame of the gun. The frame of the gun had been recovered by the local police, and they had done tool mark analysis but had been unable to show who took the gun apart.
The gun frame was sent back to the Firearms Tool Mark Unit of the FBI labs in Washington. Unique in the world, the lab has a collection of over 2,000 guns, from John Dillinger's pistol to the newest military assault rifle. Every bullet manufactured for the last 50 years is here too. Hollow point and steel jacket, 22 to 50 caliber. Like the guns, they're all here for testing and comparison. The soundproof ballistic room allows for comparison firing and bullet retrieval. Comparative microscopes allow for precise analysis of the gun barrels. But the most valuable asset in the lab are the agents, whose long experience in these specialized tests make them invaluable in difficult cases such as the Bishop murder. Jim Cadigan of the FBI Firearms and Tool Mark Unit was brought into the case to conduct a tool mark analysis of the gun frame and the 15 different wrenches and tools, including the pipe vise, taken from Gwaltney's home. Steel tools almost always leave behind some distinctive and often microscopic mark after their use, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. The FBI Tool Mark Lab is one of the largest, most specialized, and most technologically sophisticated in the country.
It was obvious from the beginning that the individual that had worked on this particular firearm knew something about forensics because he had removed several pieces of the firearm that could be of some use later on to a forensic examiner.
Agent Cadigan approached the very specific task of associating the tool marks on the gun frame with the tool marks made by the 15 gripping tools taken from the Gwaltney home.
The question was, could one of these tools have been used to hold the frame while the barrel of the firearm was being removed? In looking at the frame, I noticed near where the hole was for the pin that locks the barrel down, very near the hole for that, there was a small 1/16 of an inch impression, almost as if it was made by a small screwdriver tip, right below that hole.
This tiny mark matched a small imperfection in one of Gwaltney's tools.
In looking at the tools that were submitted from Gwaltney, I noticed that one of those tools, a pipe wrench, had a broken tooth, and the tooth was broken off in the middle, and then there was a small island of metal left on the tooth, and that looked very similar to the mark that was on the frame. So using that as a pivot point, I started making impressions with that tool and comparing those impressions under a microscope, the tool marks, with the impressions that were on the frame, and was able to come to a conclusion that that particular tool was used to the exclusion of any other tool to make the marks that were found on the frame.
In addition to the tool marks testing, the FBI lab conducted extensive testing on the particular bullets found in the Gwaltney home. The lack of a barrel on Gwaltney's gun made a ballistics test impossible, a problem that had hurt the prosecution in the state trials. So the FBI lab devised a test that had never before been used forensically, a radical new use of nuclear technology in forensic science.
When a manufacturer of lead like Remington Arms makes a batch of lead, they throw things in much as you would when you're making meatloaf. That makes each batch of lead unique. We then took over 200 rounds that the locals had collected when they did their investigation of George Michael Gwaltney. We submitted those to the lab. The lab made those radioactive and got their molecular weight, their chemical fingerprint, and lo and behold, we find approximately 27 rounds that are the exact match as the lead taken from the head of our victim.
The samples in the reactor absorb neutrons and become radioactive. This radioactivity is measured and gives a precise reading of the chemical elements in the lead from the bullet, an atomic fingerprint. The radioactive tests were indisputable. Each of the 27 bullets found in Gwaltney's closet, bullets he had sworn under oath he did not own, had come from the same batch of lead as the bullet that killed Robin Bishop. The FBI lab worked to establish a definite match between Gwaltney's gun frame and his pipe wrench, and between the fatal bullet and the bullets found in his home. Additionally, Agent Randolph constructed psychological portraits of not only George Gwaltney, but Robin Bishop. It was important that the federal jury perceive her as a genuine victim. Robin Bishop was raped by someone she was taught to respect and trust, an officer of the law.
This made it very easy to understand the lack of force of violence that was evident in the crime scene other than the trauma. And she was compliant. She respected law enforcement authority. She's the type of person that pulled over and opened her wallet and handed her and stood out and was handcuffed even though she knew all she had done was a speeding ticket. It made her an easy victim.
In the same way, the FBI examined every aspect of Gwaltney's background to gain an understanding of his behavior around women. By questioning a woman who admitted to having an affair with Gwaltney, it was learned that she would meet him at his regular spot along the isolated highway for sex. The same exit to the access road where he had taken Robin Bishop. Every woman who received a summons from Gwaltney in the last 2 years was contacted, and a pattern emerged. Nearly a dozen women claimed that Gwaltney had solicited them for sex or touched them suggestively.
This indicated to us that this was not an isolated sexual assault with Mr. Gwaltney. This is a type of pattern of behavior. When he put his uniform on, he became predatory towards females, was our conclusion.
Witness testimony from the state trials was also carefully re-examined for discrepancies that could lead to breaks in the case. In some instances, the FBI leaned hard with the weight of federal authority.
Many witnesses were reluctant to testify, fearful. It's a small community, everybody knows everybody. We had to let them know that a federal investigation is just not a local matter that's going to blow away with the wind out in the desert. We're going to be here until this is resolved.
This persistence led to one of the most crucial breakthroughs in the case. San Bernardino Sheriff's detectives had originally interviewed the owners of Barstow gun shops for signs that Gwaltney might have tried to buy a replacement barrel for his service revolver the day after the crime. None claimed to have seen him. One of those interviewed was a Mr. William Addington, owner of the Powderhorn Gun Shop. He had denied during both state trial investigations that George Gwaltney had been in his shop the day after the murder. But printouts from the shop's phone bills caught Addington in a lie.
And we found toll records that show the day after the homicide, late in the afternoon, after the briefing that Gwaltney had attended, Mr. Addington had made a phone call up to this gun shop in Sacramento attempting to order a barrel for the type of weapon that Mr. Gwaltney carried that was now missing the barrel.
Now confronted by the FBI with this evidence, Addington admitted that Gwaltney had been in his store trying to buy a barrel for his revolver the day after Robin Bishop's murder. Addington had previously lied to state investigators in an effort to avoid getting involved. Fearing that lying to the FBI was a felony, Addington broke down. Reviewing the timeline of events, the FBI found that Gwaltney had created a false alibi to cover his visit to the gun shop and shoe repair shop where he'd had his holster cleaned and dyed, claiming to be on duty at the time. Gwaltney's story was falling apart. But the most important part of the timeline that the FBI reviewed was the pickup and delivery of the neighborhood boy Preston Olson.
The problem with that story was nobody had ever sat down with Preston Olson. He testified at 2 trials, and he verified what Gwaltney said.
But as the FBI went over the events with Preston and his mother, minute by minute, they realized that Officer Gwaltney had actually left the boy's house a half hour earlier than his original testimony.
Preston never owned a watch and had never timed it, and nobody had ever done a timeline analysis with him.
This new information and the resulting revision of the timeline was one of the most important developments in the FBI's case.
We didn't stop for anything. There was no traffic whatsoever.
He can't change his story. He's locked himself in on 2 local trials to the local timeline. So the timeline was very significant. It gives him a half hour he has no explanation for.
With the revised timeline, Officer Gwaltney now had ample time, 20 to 40 minutes, to stop Bishop, handcuff her, force her to have sex with him, then shoot her.
Gwaltney knows she's got out-of-state plates. She's an attractive young blonde woman. He zips up the road, takes him a couple minutes, and then gives chase.
Finally, Dr. Edward Blake of Forensic Science Associates was contacted to re-examine the semen evidence from the first 2 trials. Prior to the use of DNA in criminal trials, the use of semen as evidence was problematic. But the FBI felt there might still be a way to use what they had. Gwaltney had had a vasectomy and had it reversed. Was there any way this information could be used in the identification and matching of his semen with the crime scene specimens? Federal prosecutors asked Dr. Blake, a forensic serologist, if there were any new scientific developments that might help the investigation.
He said, well, I mean, science does progress over time, does it not, Dr. Blake? I mean, maybe there's something, and would you be willing to just look into the matter? And I said, well, I happen to know some people that are involved in fertility work, and one of the elements that's involved in this case is the idea that Mr. Gwaltney had had a vasectomy and had it reversed.
Dr. Blake learned from colleagues at the University of California that a vasectomy reversal can sometimes cause the production of anti-sperm antibodies. The body reacts to sperm seeping into the bloodstream as if it were invading germs. The phenomenon is highly unusual and could conceivably be used as a marker in seminal fluid. He sent samples from Gwaltney to the University of California lab.
We found that not only do those fluids contain the anti-sperm antibodies, the antibodies were there at very, very high levels. And that provided the incentive to then explore the evidence itself.
Dr. Blake learned of a new test used in fertility studies. It was called the immunobead assay test and could determine the presence of anti-sperm antibodies in the crime scene samples. Because this kind of evidence had never been used in court before, Dr. Blake videotaped the test to show the jury in the federal trial.
Ultimately, extracts that were prepared from a pair of genes that were on Robin Bishop's body, samples that were taken from the Highway Patrol car seat were prepared, and these samples were tested for the presence of these anti-sperm antibodies. And in both of those samples, the anti-sperm antibodies were found.
During the 6-month FBI investigation, all of the re-examined evidence and all of the new witness testimony led to one bedrock certainty for the special agents working on the case.
We know we've got the right guy, and we're going to get him.
George Gwaltney was going back to court. George Michael Gwaltney was indicted by a federal grand jury for violating the civil rights of Robin Bishop and arrested. He was the first California law officer to be charged under the federal civil rights statute. Once again, he pleaded not guilty. But for the first time since the ordeal began, Robin Bishop's parents had hopes for a different outcome. This time, George Gwaltney faced a federal court and the FBI. It was clear from the beginning that the federal trial would not be a repeat of the first two trials. The federal trial began on January 17, 1984, in the U.S. District Court in Los Angeles. George Gwaltney was represented by public defender Carol Douglas, who chose not to have his client testify. He knew George Gwaltney was in serious trouble.
And then he subsequently murdered her.
Gwaltney knew that we were breaking his alibis, breaking his stories, and that he was going to have to concoct a new story. He had painted himself into a corner, and we were going to use his brush to paint him into a jail cell.
This is a frame-up.
As the trial progressed, the FBI punched a hole in every strong point of Gwaltney's earlier defense. The prosecution told the jury that Gwaltney had marked Robin Bishop as prey the first time he saw her in the fast food restaurant. With the testimony of the other women he had abused, Gwaltney's Officer of the Year image crumbled. After dropping Preston Olson at home, he pulled Bishop over and ordered her into his patrol car. The new testimony now gave him plenty of time. Following an established pattern, he drove to a familiar secluded spot and forced her into a sexual bargain, corroborated by the semen stain on the back seat of his new patrol car. As she sat struggling to put her boots back on, the blinding spotlight of Deputy Kaufman's patrol car hit Gwaltney, placing Gwaltney on the access road with Robin Bishop away from her car. Having no idea of who had seen him or what they had seen, he panicked and killed Robin Bishop. Then he breathlessly called the dispatcher with a possible suicide. The autopsy and the crime scene photos showed that he had not moved her head to check for a pulse. The movement was too great. He was desperately searching for the bullet that killed her, one in a series of actions in which he tried to cover up his crime. That night, Gwaltney roughly removed the barrel from the murder weapon, which left the microscopic tool-marked fingerprints that matched the gun frame with Gwaltney's tools. But perhaps most damning in the courtroom was the controversial immunobead assay test. Videotape of tested samples from Robin's jeans and the car seat show the tiny beads attaching themselves to the sperm.
What you can see in these videotapes for the appropriate specimens, that is, specimens that contain the anti-sperm antibody, is the final stage of the analysis.
Live sperm were shown swimming through the medium with the beads attached, indicating that the antibodies were present in both specimens. Dr. Blake was allowed by the judge only to indicate percentage results of his testing. He testified that Gwaltney's blood type put him in 12% of the population. Of that 12%, only 5% of those would test positive for the presence of anti-sperm antibodies. Less than 1% of the population could possibly have had sexual intercourse with Robin Bishop that night. As much as the defense might argue that the rest of the evidence was circumstantial, the scientific evidence was overpowering. The verdict was returned swiftly.
When the jury walked in, they would not look at Gwaltney, and it was very clear that they had a guilty verdict.
As far as I was concerned, I was pleased and that George had to suffer the consequences of his action, and that Robin Bishop's death didn't go uninvestigated.
It was, it's a case you'll never forget.
You took advantage of a vulnerable person.
The judge gave George Gwaltney the stiffest possible sentence, a maximum federal prison term of 90 years and a minimum term of 30 years before becoming eligible for parole.
Mr. Gwaltney, you have
12 years
betrayed your
later,
badge.
George Gwaltney died in prison of a heart attack. To the end, he claimed he was innocent and had been the victim of a frame-up. In 1981, a witness told investigators of a double murder in Idaho. Near a trapper's camp, they found a game warden's body. A second warden's body was missing, along with the killer, Claude Dallas. Investigators would track the mountain man through unforgiving country he knew better than anyone. In an area known for anti-government sentiment, the FBI knew the manhunt would be difficult, but Dallas must be found.
The sun set on the Wild West long ago, but some people refused to notice. Claude Dallas was one of them. A wily trapper, distrustful of authority, Dallas typified the rugged individualism that forged this country. He went too far when he killed 2 game wardens in 1981. The law that he despised so much began to close in. But Dallas knew the land and could live off it as long as he needed to. Finding him wouldn't be easy. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. A man like Dallas could hide almost anywhere. The severity of his crime demanded that we never stop looking. A modern-day posse formed to round up the maverick and deliver him to justice.
On January 5th, 1981, Jim Stevens arrived at a friend's trapping camp, bringing provisions as promised. He fired warning shots to report his arrival. He knew his host didn't like being surprised by unannounced visitors. The trapper, Claude Dallas, had created the gunshot warning system.
Howdy, Jim.
He was protective of his compound.
Good, Dallas. Oh, good. You
Dallas was glad to have the supplies. He was trapping for the winter in Bull Basin, a remote area in southwestern Idaho near the Nevada border. He had bagged a few bobcats out of season and planned to sell their furs in the spring. But he needed food before that to sustain him. Besides restocking Dallas's camp, Stevens had come to look for Indian artifacts. He planned to search along the river. In such an isolated area, he was bound to find new items for his collection. Dallas stayed to look over his new provisions. Stevens was away for only a short time. Overhearing raised voices, Jim Stevens soon returned to the camp. He found his friend was not alone. Dallas was arguing with two game wardens, Bill Pogue and Conley Elms.
Hey, slow. Oh, you got a gun, sir?
Stevens noticed Dallas's shoulder holster was empty. Though the wardens rarely met with trouble, few woodsmen were happy to see them. They requested Stevens' gun, following standard field procedure.
All right, talk to me again. Are you up here with him?
Yeah. He's just bringing
Pogue and Dallas argued about the bobcat skins hanging nearby. In Idaho, the season hadn't opened yet.
Season started 2 weeks ago. I know where they came from. Nevada. Those aren't from Nevada.
Dallas's temper rose as he fumbled for an excuse. Their argument intensified. Pogue mentioned a citation, further angering the trapper. Then Warden Elms entered Dallas's tent to look for more contraband. Dallas became furious, insisting they needed a search warrant.
Sir, I said stop it.
Warden Pogue turned his attention to the tent. Suddenly, Dallas was firing a gun. He had drawn a .357 he had kept hidden and emptied it into the unsuspecting wardens. Without a word, Dallas reached for his .22 rifle and carefully aimed behind the ear of Bill Pogue. Conley Elms met the same fate. Jim Stevens was stunned. Dallas immediately claimed that Pogue had tried to draw his gun. Stevens had turned away just before the shooting began. He couldn't deny Dallas's claim.
You saw his hand on his gun. I swore last time I was arrested I'd never go in again. But did you have to kill him?
But why would the warden have drawn? And why was Elms killed? Maybe his friend had gone crazy.
You find something to cover him up with.
Fearing for his life, Stevens decided it was best to cooperate. He complied with Dallas's orders. Using one of Dallas's mules, they hauled Bill Pogue's body up to the ridge where Stevens' blazer was parked. They dumped the body into the truck and returned to the camp. Conley Elms' body was too heavy for the mule to carry up the hill to the truck. Dallas first suggested they quarter him and haul the pieces. In the end, they dragged him almost half a mile across the rocky ground to the river. That would be Dallas's one mistake. He didn't wake the body. As it floated downriver, it was sure to be seen. As a trapper, Dallas knew about leaving tracks. He must cover his to make it hard on the investigators who would hunt him. Using kerosene, he burned the bloody spots left by moving the bodies. Stevens had to help. Dallas then built 2 small fires to burn the ropes used to move the wardens and some of the wardens' equipment. He tried to get rid of anything with blood on it. Dallas never expressed remorse for the killings. To Stevens, Dallas seemed without emotion. It was more reason to fear him. Dallas had to get rid of Bill Pogue's body. He decided to go to a friend's house in Nevada for help. Stevens didn't want to cross Dallas, and it might give him a chance to get away from the killer. They would head for Paradise Hill, Nevada, 5 hours away. As they drove, Dallas tried to convince Stevens that the killings were justifiable homicide. The wardens had invaded his territory and threatened him, he said. He had only defended himself. Stevens couldn't understand how it was self-defense, but he didn't argue. There was no telling what Dallas might do to him. Near the end of their drive, Dallas apologized for involving Stevens. They arrived at the home of George and Liz Nielsen in Paradise Hill, Nevada, around 11 o'clock that night. The Nielsens ran a small tavern out of their house and were just closing for the night.
George! 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 George, it's Claude!
Dallas told his old friend George he had just killed 2 fish and game officers. He needed Nielsen's help. With others around, Jim Stevens no longer feared for his life. But what he had seen and done still terrified him. Dallas told George and Liz Nielsen he had one body outside and that the other was in the river near his camp. George Nielsen shared Dallas's contempt for the law, and he believed the claim of self-defense. He agreed to help. Dallas told Stevens he could go and asked to borrow the Nielsen's pickup to take Pogue's body out and bury it. The men went outside so Dallas could move the body from the Blazer to Nielsen's pickup.
Wait a minute.
Stevens could finally head home. Dallas went off alone to get rid of the body. Hours later, he would return to the Nielsens to shower, change clothes, eat, and pack. The Nielsens would give him food and some cash. Around 5:30 a.m., Nielsen would drop him off 15 miles away, where it is believed another friend picked him up. In any case, Claude Dallas had disappeared. A few hours later, Jim Stevens realized he had to go to the police.
Liz.
After talking with George, he visited Liz Nielsen at the local hospital where she worked. She agreed they should contact authorities. They were too involved not to.
We gotta turn him in.
They met with the county prosecutor. Stevens explained that he was there at the time of the shootings, but had his back turned when Dallas started firing.
Exactly what you saw.
We went down the river there.
He didn't see if Pogue had drawn his gun, so Stevens couldn't verify or dispute Dallas's self-defense story. George and Liz Nielsen told how they had helped Dallas disappear, but they didn't know where he was. All anyone knew was that for some reason, Claude Dallas had snapped. He was unpredictable, armed, and out there somewhere. If Stevens were telling the truth, there were 2 lawmen down and a killer on the run. The prosecutor contacted Owyhee County Sheriff Tim Nettleton, who called in state authorities.
I notified the Department of Law Enforcement to gain some assistance because of the expertise that they could supply my department.
As Nettleton prepared to investigate the crime scene to check Stevens' story, the FBI was called in to track Dallas. Special Agent Frank Nenzel, then stationed in Reno, was assigned as the Nevada case agent.
The FBI was called into the investigation of the murders of officers Pogue and Elms because It was believed that Dallas had, first of all, cold-bloodedly murdered these two officers, and secondly, that he had fled the state of Idaho to avoid prosecution.
We have thick wooded areas, we have water, and we have some open terrain.
Dallas knew the land and had a head start, but the FBI had to find him. Sheriff Tim Nettleton led the investigation of the crime scene where Claude Dallas had killed the two game wardens. He was accompanied by deputies and state forensics experts. An investigator riding in a news helicopter spotted a body in the river. He radioed to the team on the ground, and they located the body of Warden Conley Elms, caught on a submerged tree branch. At least one death was verified. Back in the camp, officers approached Dallas's tent with care, on the chance he was lying in wait for them. But only pelts and skins remained. With the area secured, Sheriff Nettleton and the forensics team could begin verifying the rest of Stephen's story. They couldn't rely solely on one witness's testimony. They needed hard evidence that placed Dallas at the scene and proved what happened beyond a reasonable doubt. Investigators videotaped and took photographs to preserve the placement of footprints and other evidence. They were most interested in collecting ballistic evidence. The examiners needed to retrieve the warden's guns and any spent bullets from them. The question was whether the wardens had fired or even drawn their guns. If they had, Dallas may be innocent of murder. Searchers found .357 and .22 caliber shell casings, which they hoped to be able to trace to determine who had fired them. Although evidence had been burned, much still remained. The scorched twigs might yield powerful clues.
In the process, we found where the sagebrush had been piled on human blood, later identified as Bill Pogue's and Conley Elms' blood, and burned, we assumed, to destroy the evidence.
It was painstaking work, but their meticulousness was crucial. Even the tiniest traces of evidence would be useful to Idaho State Crime Lab examiner Rick Groff.
There was a number of blood spots that were collected off of plants, off dirt, around a campfire, just in a number of locations.
The one eyewitness, Jim Stevens, cooperated fully. His testimony would help the Idaho Department of Law Enforcement's Harry Capall reconstruct the killings.
We took, the next day I believe it was, we took Stevens and went back down to the crime scene and had him walk us through, showing us where Elms was standing, where Pogue was standing, where he was standing, where Dallas was positioned, and we acted it out and photographed it.
Investigators were sure of what had happened, but they didn't know where Claude Dallas was or where he had hidden Bill Pogue's body. Local and state officers and civilian volunteers would look for the body. The news of the warden's murders galvanized the searchers. Most of them knew the two wardens and their families. Sheriff Gary Amon, then a dispatcher, was part of the search for the body.
It was Dallas being a cold-blooded cop killer. It was scary searching, but there was anger there that you wanted to help the family find the body so they could bury their loved one.
Many of the searchers knew the 30-square-mile wilderness that they'd be scouring. But there were dozens of abandoned mine shafts and gullies in which to hide a body. And Claude Dallas knew them all.
All right, let's move it. We're burning daylight.
They would use high technology, like infrared scanners. But most importantly, they would rely on their own patience and dedication.
They were very long days. cold days. We walked, we rode horses, flew in airplanes, flew in helicopters.
The FBI's manhunt team was charged with finding Dallas. The trapper could be anywhere. He was said to know every cave and gopher hole in the area where Idaho, Oregon, and Nevada meet. So the FBI wasted no time in blanketing the region with agents.
A specialized FBI force arrived in Winnemucca this morning, 12 members of the Bureau SWAT team out of San Francisco. They'll be evaluating and following up leads from several areas.
There were about 100 officers, including SWAT teams from California, Idaho, and Nevada. It was a posse ready for anything, because no one knew what the dangerous woodsman might do. While Special Agent Frank Nanzel coordinated the Nevada search, Special Agent George Calley of the Boise Field Office became the FBI's lead investigator.
The stories out on Claude Dallas early on seemed to be that he was a loner. He was one who was not too close to other people. He was a person who could live all by himself, could go off in the mountains and be totally independent.
Dallas projected the image of a storybook mountain man to those around him. It was a tale years in the making. Dallas was born on March 11, 1950 in Winchester, Virginia, the second son in a family of 9. When he was just a boy, his father taught him to hunt and lay a trap line, and that game laws didn't apply to them. The FBI learned that Dallas's name was already in their files for a draft dodging charge more than 10 years earlier. When he was 18, he had registered for the draft as required by law, then left his family and hitchhiked to California. Dallas found work as a ranch hand, though he had no experience. But he learned fast and soon became known for his hard work and for his distrust of the law. After several years, he moved on, perhaps unaware the FBI wanted him as a draft dodger. In 1973, the FBI caught up with Claude Dallas. They arrested him for failure to report for induction. But the draft board couldn't prove he had ever received his draft notices. They dropped the charges. It was his first victory over the government laws he despised. Dallas moved to Paradise Hill, Nevada. He decided to trade ranch work for the life of a trapper. He wanted to be completely independent. Before long, Dallas was making his living solely as a trapper in the Nevada wilds. Although he was licensed, his traps often violated state game laws for illegal bait. Legitimate trappers had little respect for his operation. Sheriff Nettleton knew Dallas's reputation.
Dallas was a trash trapper. He never took the time to go with a real trapper and learn how to trap.
As authorities investigated the man they were hunting for alleged murder, they uncovered a history of conflict with the law. In 1976, Nevada game warden Dale Elliott came across some of Dallas's illegally baited traps. Dallas used birds and animal parts to lure bobcats, whose skins brought a good price. But this improper bait also attracts animals like raccoons and skunks and kills them needlessly. Elliott confiscated the traps and fined Dallas $100. 2 years later, in 1978, another game warden, Gene Weller, came across more traps in Dallas's territory. They were illegally baited with chunks of meat and had no tags. Dallas couldn't be found, and since it was late, Weller decided to return the next day to look for him. The following morning, Weller and a sheriff's deputy found Dallas's Jeep. But again, Dallas couldn't be located. Inside the Jeep, they found 2 weapons, a rifle and a revolver. It was against Nevada law to keep a loaded rifle in a vehicle, so they confiscated it. They took the revolver, too. 2 loaded weapons in a possibly abandoned vehicle presented a dangerous situation. Anyone wandering nearby could take the firearms. The officers left a note for Dallas explaining where the guns would be held.
Name's Claude Dallas, here to get my guns.
3 days later, a disgruntled Claude Dallas arrived at the sheriff's office in Winnemucca, Nevada to claim his guns. They were now unloaded, and Dallas argued that the shells that had been inside were spent. The deputies couldn't produce evidence that the guns had held live rounds. The weapons were returned, and no fine was issued. It was another Dallas victory. Claude Dallas was a man who rejected the rules of society. But if his rules allowed for murder, the FBI had to bring him in. Within days of the 2 game wardens' deaths, FBI agents gathered information about the killer Claude Dallas. Special Agent George Gwaltney led the investigation.
We realized that to find Claude Dallas, we had to learn more about him.
The FBI talked with local trappers and ranchers. Many were reluctant to help. The information on Dallas came slowly. As it did, the FBI pieced together the days leading up to the killing of the 2 game wardens. In December of 1980, a month before the killing of the wardens, Dallas had made a winter camp in the remote stretch of wilderness in Idaho's southwest corner. He would spend the winter trapping alone, but for a few visits from friends like Jim Stevens, who promised to bring mail and supplies. He chose Bull Basin for his camp. It was perfect for him. Wild, isolated country rich in deer and bobcat. A place where a man could live by his own rules. Dallas's closest neighbors were miles away. He knew other trappers sometimes worked Bull Basin, but he figured he could avoid them and the state's fish and game laws. But one day, his neighbor paid him a visit. Eddie Carlin owned the 45 Ranch, 12 miles away. He often trapped in Bull Basin, and he wanted to know who was working his territory. Carlin saw illegal bobcat furs in the camp. When he commented on them, Dallas said he didn't believe in man-made laws. Something about the trapper made Carlin uneasy.
Well, I got a long line out here. I run 45.
He nervously eyed Dallas's .357, a more powerful weapon than a trapper needs. Carlin made it clear his family had trapped in Bull Basin for years. Finally, they agreed to work separate areas of the basin.
I keep my property line squared away there. Okay.
They would stay off each other's turf. For the moment, Eddie Carlin was more concerned about a couple of trappers poaching on his 45 Ranch itself. In the Northwest, working another man's land is like stealing directly out of his pockets. Carlin drove 2 hours to the nearest phone to alert the Fish and Game Department. It was 10 p.m. on January 4th when Carlin reached Game Warden Bill Pogue. Pogue was known as a strict, by-the-books warden. Carlin knew he would help him clear his ranch of unwanted trappers.
All right, look, I'll see you in the morning.
Pogue understood Carlin's concern.
That would be great.
The poachers needed to be caught before they moved on to new territory. Pogue told Carlin he'd head out right away, but he needed to find a partner. He called 2 wardens who were unable to make the trip. Finally, he reached Conley Elms.
Yeah, Elms.
It was late, but when Elms heard the problem, he immediately agreed to go. The wardens arrived at the Carlins' 45 Ranch at 3 a.m. on January 5th. After a few hours' rest in sleeping bags outside, the men joined Eddie and Joanne Carlin for breakfast. Eddie described the poachers who were trapping on his land. The wardens considered how to approach them. Then Joanne added that there was another man named Claude Dallas trapping in Bull Basin. He was bagging game out of season.
Two other guys camping right on the edge of my ranch.
Eddie told them to watch out for Dallas. The wardens said they'd cover each other. They left to confront the trappers on the 45 ranch first. Jim Stevens arrived in Dallas's camp at mid-morning, then went off to look for artifacts, leaving Dallas alone. The wardens entered the camp to check on the possible trapping violations.
Claude Dallas?
Yep.
Come out of the tent, please. Bill Pogue, Conley Elms, game wardens.
Dallas would later tell Stevens what happened next. The wardens asked Dallas for his gun. He surrendered one that the wardens had seen, but kept a second .357 pistol hidden.
20-mile trap line goes down into Nevada. I've got a license.
Let me see your licenses.
Dallas said the argument began after the wardens checked his trapping licenses. They asked about the pelts he had hanging up.
What's in the tent?
Pogue pressed Dallas about the bobcat furs, and Dallas's anger rose.
What about these pelts? These pelts came from here.
No, these are.
Hey, sir. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey,
The tension quickly escalated,
You got a warrant?
He doesn't need a warrant.
This
Step
is
back.
my home.
Step back.
and in an instant, Dallas's temper turned deadly.
What you shooting for?
Perhaps what was most horrible was the way the wardens were executed.
Oh.
Sheriff Nettleton understood the implication of the shots to the head.
That shot behind the ear was to finish him off, and is a common way of administering death by a trapper.
Clearly, Dallas considered the wardens no more than animals stumbling into one of his traps. The cold, terrible nature of the crime didn't faze Dallas. Unshaken, he tried to cover his tracks, intimidating Jim Stevens into assisting him. Then he vanished. Within 48 hours, the hunt for Bill Pogue's body by local volunteers had begun.
Team number 2 in this direction. Team number 3 off in this direction.
Elm's body had been found, and the story Jim Stevens recounted was proving to be true. The other warden was still missing. Local and state authorities used every tool at their disposal, including Sheriff Nettleton's airplane. The aerial search allowed for initial sweeps of large areas to be conducted quickly. It was necessary in such a vast expanse of territory. Freshly dug earth or other signs of Claude Dallas's actions may have been visible from the air. But finding a body would require a slow, careful ground search, too, by a team that included Sheriff Gary Amon.
When we actually went down and searched for the body, approximately 50 or so people went down. We camped out near Paradise Valley, and we would break up into teams, and we'd go search a specific designated area that we were assigned to, and we would basically turn over every rock and look under every brush for signs of a grave or footprints, bodies, whatever, any evidence that might be related to this case.
As local authorities searched for Pogue's body, the FBI hunted Claude Dallas. He could be anywhere, from the Northwest to Mexico or beyond. Dallas was on his own turf, and the manhunt promised to be long and frustrating. Agent George Kelly and the other investigators knew that to find Dallas, they'd have to narrow the search.
We had to contact the people that he had seen in the past, and we began to get an idea of the type of person he would look up by those who had similar interests that he did. And we really concentrated on who are his friends.
Investigators knew Dallas had friends in Paradise Hill, Nevada, so they focused there, checking homes, barns, and other buildings. Agents learned Dallas kept many of his belongings in a converted trailer behind George Nielsen's bar. When agents searched it, they discovered nearly 20 weapons and some combat training manuals. It was further evidence they were hunting a man who was dangerous and knew how to kill. Inside Nielsen's bar, the FBI questioned everyone who knew Dallas. The Nielsens were helpful, telling the FBI the same information they had given the county prosecutor earlier. But others in the bar were largely uncooperative. Not many locals appreciated federal intervention. They gave agents few leads. It was clear people were protecting Dallas, either because they liked him or because they disliked the law. The federal agents weren't the only ones getting the brush off. Even local authorities like Harry Capall felt the frustration.
Some of the anti-establishment type people said the two officers deserved to be killed. They had no business being down invading this man's camp, but there were quite a few people in the Winnemucca area who really weren't too helpful, and I think our investigation would have proceeded a lot faster and quicker had they have been more willing to come forward, or if we did interview them, tell us the truth.
The fact that Dallas had a network of supporters in Nevada and Idaho gave agents the first glimpse behind his mountain man facade. It seemed he was not the self-sufficient loner some made him out to be. He was resourceful, but he was also dependent on others. The field work by agents like Frank Menzel slowly uncovered the truth about Claude Dallas.
He wasn't earning any money, so he had to have some way to eat and sleep and that sort of thing, or a place to go to hide. So he was able to avoid us because he did have some friends, not only in the state of Nevada, but Northern California, where he had relatives.
As investigators learned how Dallas operated, they figured out how to bring him out of hiding. They'd make the reclusive backwoodsman the best recognized man in the West, so he'd have to come home to hide. They designed and distributed a wanted poster and put a $20,000 reward on Dallas's head. Sheriff Nettleton called it the poster war.
I had requests from so many police agencies, all the way from Alaska, all up and down the West Coast. They were in Field and Stream. Virtually every gun shop west of the Mississippi had one hanging up. And any place that Mr. Dallas went, he would see his face. Any of his haunts, any of his friends would see it.
This would leave him only one place to hide, back in Paradise Hill, where most of his supporters were. Investigators kept the pressure on, following every lead, searching every day, and waiting for Dallas to resurface. After 15 months, agents noticed the people of Paradise Hill becoming uneasy. They acted nervous when any law officer was nearby. The agents worked their contacts and learned that Claude Dallas was coming back to town. FBI agents persuaded a friend of Dallas's to turn informant and notify them when Dallas actually returned. In April of 1982, the informant came in to talk. He didn't want any trouble. Claude Dallas had moved in with a friend, he said. He was at Craig Carver's trailer just outside of Paradise Hill. There were plenty of weapons in the trailer. Within 12 hours, the arrest team had assembled and was ready to raid Carver's trailer. They had to act fast. There was no room for error. On Sunday, April 18, 1982, the FBI made their move on Claude Dallas. They descended upon his quiet, remote hiding spot. With air and ground support, the SWAT team quickly positioned themselves for the raid. They knew Dallas was an expert marksman and that he would be heavily armed. Special Agent George Gwaltney was at the raid.
And I well recall the announcement that this is the FBI, and Claude Dallas come out, words to this effect. And he did, he came out.
But not the way they expected. Dallas dived through the window of the trailer and went to a truck. Agents were momentarily helpless to stop him. The arrest team mobilized and the chase was on. The FBI had spent more than a year tracking the cop killer. They could not let him get away. Cruisers and the helicopter stayed on his tail despite the danger. Dallas was shooting from his truck as he sped along. Agents and officers returned fire as they chased him. He seemed unstoppable, even bulletproof. But then his luck ran out. His truck stopped dead. The shooting stopped too. Dallas had been shot. He slipped out of his truck and crawled away. Men on the ground couldn't see him through the tall brush, but from the air, Nanzel had a bird's eye view. Unfortunately, with the agents out of their vehicle, he had no means of radio contact with them. So he was helpless to warn them.
When I saw that agent walking toward Dallas, this agent was a very highly trained special agent SWAT team leader named Dave Gillen out of Las Vegas. I didn't think he saw Dallas, and I thought there could be, I thought Dallas could have killed him right there. And it really scared me badly.
But as the agents approached, to everyone's surprise, Dallas lifted his arms and gave up. He was transported to a nearby hospital for treatment. The FBI had their man. Frank Nanzel breathed a sigh of relief.
Dallas told us he could have killed the agent that was walking toward him. And I said, thanks for not killing him.
With Claude Dallas secure behind bars, prosecutors began to build their case against him.
This morning, investigators went through Dallas's belongings looking for evidence to help in prosecuting him. Items searched included traps, pelt stretch boards, clothing, and 8 guns.
I believe there is a possibility that we could have the homicide weapon, but we don't know.
How many weapons are you looking for?
We're looking for one particular weapon.
But you're specifically looking for the gun that Claude used to shoot?
We're hoping it might be in this bunch.
At the Idaho State Forensics Lab, examiners tested the weapons confiscated from Dallas's trailer. They hoped to find the guns used to execute the wardens. But the tests were inconclusive. Prosecutors would have to rely on other forensic evidence and the testimony of Jim Stevens to earn a conviction. When Claude Dallas was released from the hospital, he was booked at the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, then flown back to Winnemucca, Nevada.
When they had Dallas in custody and got back to the airport in Winnemucca, it was just a feeling of relief. Hey, it's over with. Now let's get him tried.
Authorities were taking no chances, Security at the Owyhee County Courthouse was bolstered for Dallas's arrival.
From the first day of the trial, the courthouse was jammed with spectators, split into pro and anti-Dallas camps. His most vocal advocates were the so-called Dallas cheerleaders.
During the trial, there was a group, mostly ladies, that were openly antagonistic towards any law enforcement, that thought Mr. Dallas was cute and being railroaded. Didn't mind telling anybody that we had no business prosecuting him.
The prosecution expected an easy conviction on first-degree murder charges. They had a witness to the crime, forensic evidence, and a defendant who eluded capture for over a year. But it wouldn't be easy. Whether it was the strong defense or Dallas's charisma, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury reached a shocking verdict. Instead of the maximum charge of first-degree murder, they found Claude Dallas guilty of 2 lesser charges of voluntary manslaughter. If the jury was beguiled by Dallas, the judge was not. He gave Dallas the maximum sentences he could, a total of 30 years. During the trial, Dallas finally gave up the location of Bill Pogue's body. This provided some relief to the people who had searched the wilderness for months. Still, many felt justice had not been done.
We were shocked that Dallas got away with this, because he had cold-bloodedly murdered 2 very fine Idaho officers, and not only murdered them, but shot them in the back of the head like they were just animals that he caught in a trap. And I thought that it was the worst decision. There was no justice. I felt bad for law enforcement, but I really felt bad for Pogue and Elm's family. I thought that was just tragic.
Bill Pogue's body was recovered from a shallow grave about 15 miles southwest of Paradise Hill, Nevada. And Claude Dallas began serving his time at the Idaho State Penitentiary. But the ordeal was not over. After 3 years in captivity, on Easter Sunday, 1986, he once again became a fugitive. Agents believed a woman from Reno who had befriended him brought him wire cutters on a visit. He used them to cut through the prison fence. It seems she also provided the getaway car. Dallas was now an escaped killer, and the manhunt team responded with full force. The FBI placed him on their list of 10 most wanted fugitives at the request of Special Agent George Gwaltney.
We knew could be difficulty in finding him, that should get him on the top 10. Knew that getting this publicity, not only nationwide, but worldwide, and our wanted flyers that go out.
Special Agent Nenzel welcomed the top 10 listing.
You have the backing of the entire FBI, more so than you would in just a regular case. I mean, we have all the equipment, helicopters, planes, technical advice, laboratory, SWAT teams, people that are able to do all kinds of things will help you on a solid lead on an FBI top 10 fugitive case.
The media also turned more attention to the case, generating more leads. The search was off to a strong start. Hopes were high when agents quickly located the car allegedly used in the escape. Forensics examiners processed it for prints. It may lead them to the escapee. But he had left no trace of himself. A few months after Dallas's escape, agents had a hot tip on his whereabouts. He was hiding in the small mining town of Eureka, Nevada. Under cover of darkness, Vegas and Reno SWAT teams arrived for the raid. They threw a device called a flashbang through the front door to stun anyone inside and send up a smoke screen to cover agents when they entered. Would the fugitive Claude Dallas finally be brought to justice? SWAT team members searched the house for Claude Dallas, but he had slipped away again. Maybe the agents had been in the small town too long and word had gotten out. In any case, Dallas was gone. It would be several more months before agents got their best break, almost a year after his escape from prison. They had been following another of his friends, Danny Martinez, who lived in the ranching community of Riverside, California. Martinez had a friend who looked a lot like Dallas, and he talked the friend into giving Dallas his ID. The friend was uncomfortable with the arrangement. He called the FBI and agreed to help them. Meanwhile, Dallas fled to Mexico using the ID. He cut his hair, shaved his beard, and got a nose job. He had a new look, but he hadn't changed his pattern. As before, he returned to where his friends were, as agents predicted. When Claude Dallas returned to Riverside, Martinez had the informant take Dallas to a motel. The friend quickly alerted the FBI. Knowing Dallas was inside, a SWAT team assembled at the convenience store across from the motel. He was surrounded and he was unarmed, so he could not fight back this time. Claude Dallas was once again in custody.
Anyone will be a front for you.
He was transported back to Idaho to stand trial. The charge was escaping from a state penitentiary. It seemed certain he would be found guilty. But again, he worked his magic on the witness stand. He claimed prison officials had concocted an elaborate scheme to kill him because they saw him as a cop killer. Amazingly, the jury bought his story, baffling agents like Frank Nenzel.
Dallas was acquitted from escape, which totally astounded every FBI agent I ever knew that worked on this case, or any agent that ever heard about this case. It just was beyond belief that Dallas could escape from prison and then go to trial for that and be acquitted.
Claude Dallas, who admitted killing 2 law officers, seemed somehow charmed when it came to prosecution.
By this time, he had got off of his draft dodging. He got off of shooting 2 officers. Now he gets off of escape because the authorities are mean to this poor little boy. That's been his defense every time.
But Dallas was defeated. He lost the year reduction in his sentence he had earned for good behavior, and he was returned to prison to serve the remaining 27 years of his term. Sheriff Gary Amon saw through Dallas's false image.
Claude Dallas, to me, was a wannabe cowboy loner that wasn't near as tough as he thought he was.
Harry Capall agrees.
I don't think ever earned the right to be called a mountain man or a trapper. He was nothing more than a thief and a murderer.
Following the game wardens' deaths, their widows initiated the construction of a memorial to Idaho's fallen officers. The monument stands as a testimonial to the true heroes of the West, those men and women sworn to uphold and protect the law. Organized crime tore through the suburbs of Chicago, leaving violence and corruption in its wake. Prominent officials were seduced by greed and power, doing whatever was necessary to protect their interests. Everyone was on the take.
FBI search
It would fall on the FBI to weed out the corruption and to find the killer of an innocent woman.
Willow Springs, Illinois seemed like any other quiet Midwestern community, but it was really one of the most corrupt places in the nation. This tiny village nestled just outside of Chicago was in the hip pocket of organized crime. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It was only a matter of time before corruption led to assassination and conspiracy. To end it required a federal sting operation of astounding complexity.
The bank of a sanitary canal in a remote industrial area became the site of a gruesome crime. The killers were quick and thorough. Nearby, 2 police officers were out on night patrol. When they heard the shots fired, they became alarmed. One of the officers drove towards the canal to investigate. He found nothing as he searched the desolate area.
Hey, Chief.
Also on the scene was Willow Springs, Illinois Police Chief Michael Corbett.
I heard it earlier myself, and I've already checked the area, so it's
He too saw nothing.
I got it covered. See you later.
The following day, a prominent local attorney called police to report that his wife was missing.
Well, Mr. Masters, we'd like to ask a few questions about your wife.
Lieutenant Howard Vanek of the Cook County Sheriff's Department and his partner responded to the call. Attorney Alan Masters said that his wife Diane had been out the night before with colleagues and friends from a local college where she worked.
After the meeting, some of the board members would go to a bar.
She never came home. There was no sign of her yellow Cadillac.
I believe
He said he made calls trying to locate her until 2 in the morning, but finally gave up. For the officers, the information offered little insight.
Excuse me a minute.
Lieutenant James Keating of the Cook County Sheriff's Department joined the officers.
Yeah, by all means, you can sit down.
Sir, we were just asking Mr. Masters questions about his wife's disappearance.
He asked Masters if he could have a look around the house.
Be happy to. Sure. Yeah, by all
Masters
means.
agreed.
No, not at all.
He had nothing to hide.
Have a seat.
The officers continued their questioning.
Anything else you can tell us?
As far as I
Reluctantly,
know,
Masters
she's
offered
meeting
some
with her
new
lover,
information.
Some professor, somebody works for the college.
He suspected that his wife Diane had been having an affair.
I have no idea
Maybe
who
the
he
two
is,
lovers
you know?
had run off together.
I don't know who he is or what he looks like. I just have my suspicions.
Excuse me, guys. I think we need to wrap this up.
Lieutenant Vanek wanted to investigate further and look around the house himself.
Sir, I think we need to take another look around in here.
Husbands are always suspects when their wives disappear.
There's nothing
Sir,
here.
we need to look around.
It's time to go.
Something's missing here,
Let's
sir.
go now.
But Lieutenant Keating intervened. He
Sir,
wouldn't
procedure
allow
is
it.
2 investigators always check out the scene.
In his mind, everything had checked out.
Let's
Sir.
go now.
Vanek was upset. He didn't know why Keating would undermine his investigation. Outside, Keating confronted Lieutenant Vanek, telling him to back off. As far as he was concerned, Masters was not a suspect. But Vanek didn't buy it, and he let Keating know. Just as the two men were about to explode, Willow Springs Police Chief Michael Corbett arrived at the scene.
Look, easy. Come on, guys. Let's be on the same side. Come on, man.
Keating would have the final word.
Hey, Vanek, you're off the case. Forget it. You're off the case, man. You got that?
The question still remained. Where was Diane Masters? Her disappearance grabbed the media's attention.
And Diane, if you would, please cut the ribbon.
She had been very active in the local community. Diane had worked hard to help open a shelter for battered women. She was also involved in local politics and sat on the board of the Moraine Valley Community
Also, we'd like to
College.
present Diane with this plaque to show
She
her
did
how
not
much we
appear to
thank
have
her
any
for all
enemies.
the hard work and her dedication in opening this crisis center, something that is needed desperately in this community.
But investigators began uncovering other details. It was reported by Diane's friends that her husband was controlling and abusive, and that Diane was planning to file for divorce. Assistant U.S. Attorney Tom Scorza followed the case.
We were pretty certain that what had happened here was that Diane and Alan had a regular marital dispute, sort of ordinary dispute, but that it had escalated into something much worse.
Go ahead and send them in.
Scorza's investigation soon revealed that Alan Masters was more than just a bad husband.
Hey, Al, how you doing?
It was rumored that Alan Masters had bribed local officials and police officers to secure favorable outcomes for his clients.
How'd it go?
Very well. Very well. Nothing to worry
This
about at
corruption
all.
extended right to the top of law enforcement. Allegedly, Masters frequently enlisted the help of Chief Corbett.
I don't hear about this anymore. It'll be worth every penny.
It was also rumored that Masters and Chief Corbett were involved in safeguarding some of the Chicago mob's betting and prostitution rings, which were run out of show clubs throughout suburban Cook County. But investigators were focused only on Diane's disappearance. With no evidence and few leads, that investigation stalled. Unaware of Alan Masters or his wife's disappearance, the FBI had already begun an independent investigation into the mob-controlled rackets of the Chicago area. U.S. Attorney David Stetler worked with the FBI to help unravel the prostitution operation.
At that time, there were a number of topless, bottomless joints that one could go to, and many of them were undercover fronts for prostitution. So you could go in, you could watch the naked girls dancing on the stage, and for a price, you could retreat to the back, either to a booth or a back room, and engage in one form of sexual activity or another with the dancers.
The club owners knew that their customers would spend more on drinks and prostitutes if they could use their credit cards. But the patrons were reluctant. They did not want bills arriving at their homes or businesses with charges incurred from nightclubs with seedy names. The club owners found credit card transaction companies that were willing to process the charges using false but respectable business names. Special Agent Ivan Harris of the FBI's Chicago field office was assigned to help bring down the illegal businesses.
The scam was using various companies in order to launder credit cards through their business to make it appear that businessmen were actually eating at a restaurant or using a limousine service to incur the charges when in fact they were charges for prostitution.
Larry Wright was one of the credit card transaction company owners. Wright would pick up the week's transactions from the clubs and process them through his company, National Credit Service, or NCS. One of his clients was a club owner named Joseph Marin, whose club was a front for a mob-controlled prostitution house. Wright wanted to expand his own operations. He approached Marin about setting up an illegal betting club.
She's not had a chance to really interview her.
Marin was willing to help out the man who made him money.
She dances to the group.
Wright would first need to pay protection money to local police in order not to be exposed and arrested.
You feel pretty confident about this guy?
Marin was the man who could arrange that protection. Wright was more than willing to pay.
All right.
Marin arranged the meeting at the Willow Springs Police Department.
I trust him completely.
It was to take place with Police Chief Michael Corbett. It was believed that Corbett had been handpicked by the Chicago mob boss to oversee and protect their interests in and around Willow Springs.
The word on the street, of course, was that no one could do anything in Willow Springs without the permission of the Chief of Police, Mike Corbett. The message also was, from virtually anyone you would talk to, that he was so powerful, that he was so well connected, that nothing could ever be done about him.
I just want to make sure I don't get any unexpected visits.
Corbett agreed to help Larry Wright set up the new betting operation for a price.
Not quite yet.
In return, Corbett assured him he wouldn't get any heat from his officers.
All right.
Larry Wright was well on his way. He returned to his office at National Credit Service, operated out of a nondescript office park location. Wright worked with 2 other staff members.
Doing great. Larry. Great.
But these were not ordinary employees. NCS was not just a credit card transaction service for illegal activities. It was a front for the FBI. Larry Wright was actually undercover Special Agent Larry Damron. And he and the FBI were using NCS to work their way into the heart of the corruption in Willow Springs. While local investigators struggled to unravel the disappearance of a prominent attorney's wife, the FBI had set up an undercover operation in the town of Willow Springs, just outside of Chicago. Their target, organized crime, and the corrupt police who protected them from prosecution. The undercover work was often painstaking and frustrating. FBI Special Agent Larry Damron explains the difficulties inherent in undercover work.
During the course of the undercover operation, you try to immerse yourself in what you're doing, and you try to assume that role because it's necessary for you to do that in order to accomplish anything. Oftentimes you'll hear people make comments, or you'll see people do things that in any other circumstance they would be arrested for immediately. And so what you have to remember is you're in a role and you play that role out.
Damron had heard stories about how the mob resolved problems. They were swift and violent, and their signature was unmistakable. 2 bullets in the head. There was no room for mistakes. Victor Spilatro, a player in Chicago's organized crime, approached Damron at NCS. Though Victor himself wielded little power, his brothers held tremendous influence within the mob's hierarchy. Damron was starting to move into the center of the violent Chicago underworld.
The Spilatros were one of the best-known names of mobsters in Chicago. The older brother, Tony, was the boss in Las Vegas. He represented the Chicago outfit for their interests in Las Vegas. Had been a prominent figure and had been widely mentioned in the paper as having been involved in murders and extortions and things like that.
Agent Damron quickly developed a reputation as an effective businessman in laundering money for mob operations.
We got everything back here that you need. All right, you come on back.
Sure everything's all right?
Spilatro knew of NCS's activities with the local nightclubs. They were under his control.
Really appreciate what you're doing.
Good, everything's going good with the business?
Yes, it's going great.
That's great. Good.
He told Damron he would have to pay him a cut to stay in business.
I'm glad you appreciate what we do for you. Okay, well that's really good.
Damron had no objection.
The level that we had there is we were paying protection to a fairly important aspect of the mob, the Spilatro family. And so that gave us a little bit of status, if you will, but we had absolutely no authority or anything like that in the mob. We were just workers, and our value was we made them money.
Agent Damron traveled to a remote hotel where he met with FBI Special Agent Gordon Brooks, who oversaw the undercover operation. To ensure that Damron's real identity was not compromised, the two met infrequently to exchange information. Brooks vigilantly kept tabs on Damron. The investigation was as dangerous as it was complex.
Not to worry about things.
The agent cautiously moved forward. He wanted to continue expanding the FBI's undercover operations. He used every opportunity he could to sell the idea of opening more betting and prostitution houses throughout suburban Chicago. Even with a go-ahead from the Spilatros, Damron would still need permission and protection from the police.
To the future.
He met with nightclub owner Joseph Marin to hash out the details of the new clubs and secure police protection.
Larry, how you doing?
But there was a problem.
Look, I got some upsetting news.
What's up?
Their protector, Chief Corbett, had been removed by the Willow Springs City Council under suspicion of corruption. Marin knew another high-ranking law enforcement official who could provide the same protection as Corbett. Lieutenant James Keating, Cook County's Vice Squad Supervisor.
Tell you what, he deals with me.
U.S. Attorney Tom Scorza was not surprised by the development. Keating's reputation was well known.
Okay, you feel pretty confident about this guy?
Jim Keating was a lieutenant in the Cook County Sheriff's Police Department, but if anything, the rank understated his influence. He was a very well-connected officer in a very corrupt department. He had connections with people of higher rank who were also corrupt, and so he was a key figure.
With Corbett out of the picture, the FBI shifted their focus to Keating. Damron met with him at a restaurant outside of Willow Springs.
It allows me to really concentrate on my job.
Keating said he'd have no problem helping Damron expand his operations.
One thing we need to understand is if there's a situation that comes up.
But any move Damron made would have to be approved by him.
I make the decision when something goes down.
He warned Damron to play it straight with him and his people.
He told us that the one thing that he wouldn't tolerate was if someone double-crossed him. And he said if that happened, that they'd find us with our legs on one of the streets in the area and our head on another street in the area.
As instructed by the FBI, Damron proposed another operation. A club that would be a front for prostitution.
Hold on to this.
He gave the lieutenant the first of many payments to ensure police protection.
Looks like a bonus for the guys, huh?
Before he left, Keating said he knew someone who might be able to help him. A lawyer named Alan Masters. Though he had no direct dealings with Alan Masters, Damron had heard the name mentioned by Chief Corbett.
Well, I knew that Masters was a well-known attorney on the south side of Chicago, that he had a tremendous reputation for being able to get things done, particularly in the local court system, and the scuttlebutt was that he wasn't reluctant to pay bribes or to deal with people however he needed to.
Damron continued his meetings with his case supervisor, Special Agent Gordon Brooks. Damron needed to know everything he could about Alan Masters and his relationship with Keating and Corbett.
Now, you're in with Corbett. He's dirty.
The FBI and U.S. attorneys quickly established a hierarchy within this ring of corruption.
Okay, you're making your way up to Keating? Right. I want you to...
Corbett was the king in Willow Springs, but anytime he had to do something that involved the broader Cook County, he needed to get the permission of Keating. And Keating always had to check with the ultimate fixer, Alan Masters, to make sure everything could be handled at the court level.
I can maybe get Masters interested.
As the extent of Alan Masters' criminal activity became clearer, the FBI began looking closer at his possible role in his wife's disappearance. The two distinct cases were beginning to overlap, and Damron's objectives were broadening.
Authorities call 3 counties still.
He was a suspect in the disappearance of his wife. It was thought that if we could develop a relationship with him, there might be something there that would come to light and might be of some benefit to that investigation.
Damron learned that Alan Masters allegedly made payoffs to several area judges in exchange for favorable decisions.
Now, we need to have that hearing on the Sanderson case. It needs to go our way. We have an understanding of that, Judge?
Agents speculated that Diane might have witnessed her husband's illegal activity and threatened to expose him.
I think we can come to terms with that. Right this way, sir.
Now trying to elicit information about Diane's disappearance, Damron continued his efforts to make inroads into the corruption around Willow Springs. He met with Keating several weeks later to follow up on his plan to open a show club.
A good manager lined up.
Oh, I've got
Again,
a friend,
Keating mentioned that his friend Alan
a lawyer
Masters
friend
could
that,
help.
can take care of that. He's a real fixer.
Damron took the opportunity to bring up Alan's wife. Keating said little, but then added an unusual comment.
The same plan we had with the other one.
Probably heard him, seen him.
We talked about Masters' wife turning up missing, and Keating said, well, she turned up missing like the day before the divorce was going to be filed.
That was convenient, wasn't it?
It was convenient.
And chuckled about what a good circumstance that was.
Damron was cautious not to probe too far, fearing that Keating might grow suspicious.
You've known this fella for a long time?
Yeah,
You've known him for a while. I've worked with him before.
Sure, he can do.
As the meeting ended, Keating handed over Alan Masters' phone number, saying the lawyer was expecting his
You
call.
won't be implicated.
I just need to make it lined up. I'm going with the same.
He proceeded to set up the meeting with Alan Masters.
Hello?
Mr. Masters, how are you? This is Larry Wright speaking.
The attorney agreed to help push through all the necessary permits and legal documents, which meant bribing officials and securing protection.
Yeah, we've been working pretty hard on it for a while now.
Well, someone I think it'd be a pretty
Masters
good
suggested
location.
they get together.
Talking about,
The meeting was set for the following week, Monday, December 13th.
Okay, I'll look forward to meeting you then. I think we can maybe do some business.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Before the meeting would take place, however, a police officer on routine patrol near the sanitary canal area in Willow Springs noticed something unusual. Tire tracks led directly into the canal. He immediately called for assistance. Little did he know that the lid was about to come off the underworld in Willow Springs.
Find these trucks out here and mark.
While the FBI continued their undercover operation in the Chicago suburb of Willow Springs, an officer out on routine patrol made an alarming discovery. Tire tracks leading directly into the sanitary canal. Police officers and a dive team responded to the site. Overseeing the investigation was James Ross, an honest cop appointed by City Council to replace Michael Corbett as the police chief in Willow Springs. Though Corbett had been ousted from the department, his legacy of corruption remained. Below the surface, divers found a virtual underwater parking lot. 82 cars lined the bottom of the polluted canal. U.S. Attorney Tom Scorza believed he knew why the cars were there. And who could make a profit by allowing them to be dumped without a police investigation?
Those are known as insurance give-ups, people who want to collect money on their car when the car is not worth very much anymore will find a way of losing the car and then reporting it stolen and collecting insurance. My belief was that Corbett had been the approver of all of the dumping of the cars in the Willow Springs Canal.
By nighttime, a third car had been dredged up, a yellow Cadillac. The license plate on the vehicle, DGM-19, was well known in Willow Springs. It was the tag registered to Diane Masters. Lieutenant Keating of the Cook County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene. Chief Ross was surprised that Keating, a vice cop, had been notified. He asked Keating why he was there. Keating had no response. Officers continued examining the Cadillac. When they pried open the trunk, they discovered a decomposed body. Ross immediately ordered that the car and the body be taken back to a city garage where they could be thoroughly examined for clues. The decision not to use the police garage was well reasoned. Chief Ross knew this case potentially had far-reaching implications, and he couldn't trust his own officers. The fewer people nosing around, the better. State police began to scour the car and the body for evidence. They found .22 caliber shell casings in the trunk. The keys were still in the ignition. Eerily, the watch on the deceased body and the dashboard clock had stopped at exactly the same time, 1:50. They removed the body for further forensic investigation. The forensic team examining the body found the skull had been crushed. They also discovered 2 bullet hole entries in the left cheekbone. The bullet fragments inside the skull were removed and sent off to the FBI lab for ballistic evaluation. Dental records confirmed what everyone believed. The body found in the trunk was Diane Masters. The 9-month investigation into Diane's disappearance was now a homicide investigation.
Come on in.
Chief Ross called in Cook County Detective John Reed to work the homicide. He was to team up with the FBI, who was now taking over the murder investigation. Detective Reed was not to trust even his closest friends in the department. He was told that through the FBI undercover operation run out of NCS, law enforcement officers were being investigated for corruption. And some had ties to Alan Masters, who was now a firm suspect in Diane's murder.
All right. We were just talking about the...
As Agent Harris and Detective Reed initiated their murder investigation,
Mr.
Agent
Masters, Larry
Damron
Wright
continued his undercover
calling as we
operation.
agreed today to set up a time and place for our meeting.
He called
no,
Alan
Doris-
Masters to
Doris
confirm
is
their
working
meeting to
here.
set up the show
I'm
club.
jammed. I expect to be in court all day tomorrow. I'm sorry.
Well,
Masters was evasive and
next
seemed
week's
distracted.
okay too, if that's okay with you.
Maybe we can work something out then. Just give me some time.
He canceled the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Wright.
Damron immediately called Keating. With the conversation being
Keating.
recorded by the FBI, he hoped Keating would explain why Masters was being evasive.
No, I was wondering if you had any information on that.
As I said, he's pretty busy. How about if you give me a call in 3 or 4 weeks?
But Keating was cryptic.
Maybe we can work something out then.
He instructed Damron not to bother Masters. He had too many problems to deal with.
Okay, bye.
The new show club would have to wait.
What do you got for me? Here are the transcripts.
Damron met with Agent Brooks. Masters and Keating both appeared nervous since Diane's body had been discovered. But that was hardly enough evidence to prosecute either of them for murder. Perhaps Damron had overlooked something. He handed over his tape-recorded conversations with Keating.
This is gonna nail him. We're gonna get him.
Can you play that again, please?
Over the next several months, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Cook County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI began the process of merging the various investigations.
All right. Well,
The link between them was Alan Masters, Cook County Lieutenant James Keating, and former Willow Springs Police Chief Michael Corbett.
If that's the case,
If we can put
It would fall on prosecutors to begin constructing a case proving that the three men and all of their activities represented an ongoing, organized criminal enterprise.
Right. We can get the RICO prosecution happening.
And what we had to do in order to prosecute Masters and Corbett and Keating for a collection of their activities, including the homicide, we had to show that they made up a criminal organization, a mini-mafia.
Appreciate you meeting with us tonight, Mrs. Capstaff.
Well, if you guys don't
Detective Reed and Agent Harris's first step was to question Diane's friends who had been with her on the night she disappeared.
Okay.
You said that you followed her home that night.
One of Diane's colleagues, Genevieve Capstaff, had actually followed Diane home that evening after a board meeting.
And so I just wanted to see, so I followed her.
Capstaff claimed everyone on the Moraine Community College Board who worked with Diane suspected that she was having an affair with an economics professor. She admitted that she wanted to see if the two were going to rendezvous. She followed Diane to her street. When Diane turned to go home, Capstaff continued on.
Is there anything else that you can tell me?
Further
that
questioning
might-
revealed that all of the community college board members, including Diane, were given a $100,000 life insurance policy as part of their employment benefits.
$100,000.
Right, yes, but that only covers...
The policy specifically stated that proceeds would be paid if a board member died while traveling to and from board meetings. The policy was void when the board member entered their home.
That's all, but...
We appreciate your
Alan Masters claimed Diane never arrived home that night. He was therefore eligible to collect the insurance money. Several months before Diane's body was discovered in the trunk of her car, Masters filed a claim with the insurance company. After filling out all the paperwork, he sent it off. Though Diane's fate at that time was unclear, Masters had a judge declare her legally dead. As a result, he was about to receive $100,000. Alan Masters was fast becoming the FBI's prime suspect in the murder of his wife, Diane. Shortly after her body was discovered, investigators learned that he had filed a claim with his wife's insurance company. Within a few months, 2 checks appeared in the amount of $50,000 each. If federal agents and prosecutors could prove Masters was responsible for his wife's death and that he profited from it, it would be one more element that showed that he and his accomplices were involved in an ongoing criminal enterprise. Homicide in a federal racketeering case carries much more jail time than a state charge. As the investigation began to take on a clearer focus, FBI agents working the undercover case received bad news.
Listen, we're going to have to move rather quickly on this.
The Washington Post had gotten word of the operation.
Listen, we're having a bit of a problem.
We're almost at the point where we can really make some impact.
The Post gave the FBI 3 weeks to wrap it up before running the story.
We have some have to be closed down. Is that right? Yeah, something like that.
All 16.
Agents had no choice but to quickly bring their undercover operations to a close.
Here, so please do me a favor.
For U.S. Attorney David Stetler, the timing couldn't have been better.
The project had run its course, and the bulk of the information anybody was ever going to get had been retrieved, and to make the operation go on longer would have resulted in additional evidence, but it also would have resulted in the evidence that had been gathered becoming more and more stale.
Agents had meticulously pieced together the web of corruption that extended to the nightclubs under mob control. Now it was time to shut them down.
Yo, FBI, open the door. Open the door.
The FBI hit all of the clubs on the same night with massive force. Several hundred officers and agents raided over a dozen clubs throughout Cook County, including those in Willow Springs.
Stay
right here. Go on in, fella. Stay right here.
Sit tight. Come here. All right, hands behind your back.
Inside the clubs, federal agents were able to collect volumes of incriminating evidence. "55 people were indicted, including club owner Joseph Marin, Tony Spilatro, and his brother Victor. They were prosecuted in both the state and federal courts for extortion, prostitution, bribery, and racketeering. Several deputies from the Cook County Sheriff's Department and officers from the Willow Springs Police Department were also indicted and convicted for protecting these businesses. After 3 years of undercover work, the sting operation was now officially closed.
What's your friend's name?
For undercover Special Agent Larry Damron, it was finally time to leave the role of Larry Wright.
I would say the finish was elation and disappointment at the same time. Disappointment that there were so many opportunities out there to identify other criminal activity. We knew that that it was a good job, that we had gathered tremendous amounts of evidence, and that we had a real insight into some of the criminal activity that was taking place that we hadn't had before.
Alan Masters.
Local authorities, the FBI, and prosecutors could now focus exclusively on the Diane Masters murder investigation.
She said he hit her.
Oh, yeah,
They continued questioning her friends and associates, including the man with whom she was allegedly having an affair.
There were other things that happened.
Economics professor Jim Koselniak. He confirmed that he and Diane had a relationship. He also claimed that Masters had abused Diane physically, mentally, and emotionally. She lived in fear of her husband. Diane had told him she planned to file for divorce. Koselniak also had reason to fear Alan Masters. One night, Koselniak and Diane had met for drinks at a local bar. He recalled that Diane called home to check on her daughter. Instead of getting the babysitter on the phone, Alan unexpectedly answered.
Alan?
He suspected she was with her lover.
I didn't know you were
He
in
was
trouble.
irate and began to
I
threaten
was
her.
calling to check on Andra.
He vowed to destroy her. Koselniak said Diane returned from the phone call and was very upset. He went to the bar for more drinks. There, a man suddenly confronted him and began firing off a series of questions.
Yes, I did.
The man never identified himself.
10, 12 years.
What's your name?
He asked Koselniak's name and where he worked.
Koselniak.
Koselniak.
Though the man said little else, Koselniak felt he had just received a threat. Stay away from Diane.
And
Koselniak would later recognize the man as Lieutenant James Keating. He said that on the night of Diane's disappearance, she had called him and warned him not to meet her for drinks.
So this was an unusual move on her part.
They usually got together after her college board meetings. Lately, she had been troubled by Alan's behavior.
That they were going to another restaurant.
Koselniak took her advice and canceled their plans. He never saw Diane again.
The meeting was always straight to RDG.
As a matter of fact, they're on the way now.
Agent Harris and Detective Reed continued to develop witnesses.
Hey, let you come by.
They discovered that Masters had hired a private investigator to keep tabs on Diane.
That his wife Diane.
We subsequently developed a cooperating individual named Ted Nakaza, who was a private investigator with Alan Masters. Masters had requested Ted Nakaza to place a bug on his home telephone number because he suspected his wife Diane was having an affair.
I got a few tapes.
Hey, what do you guys got for me?
Nykaza told investigators the bug was successful in exposing Diane and Koselniak's affair.
Good news.
Ted Nykaza played back a telephone conversation captured on tape where Diane was talking in a highly sexual way with the boyfriend, Jim Koselniak. According to Nykaza, after playing the tape, Alan Masters declared his intention to kill Diane and to get Keating to make it look like an accident.
Alan Masters wanted his wife murdered, and he had the resources to get away with it.
You gotta stay cool.
The FBI and local authorities continued to uncover evidence against Alan Masters and his associates that pointed towards a conspiracy to murder Alan's wife, Diane. Through a private investigator hired by Alan Masters, Diane's affair had been exposed.
Wife was cheating.
Alan's rage was out of control.
Yes.
But investigators had no hard evidence to charge him with murder. After an exhaustive 5-year investigation, that was about to change.
He intended to have Diane killed.
They uncovered a Cook County Sheriff's deputy who was willing to talk.
Agent Harris.
Deputy Jack Bachman had startling information.
Keating brought me into his
Bachman
office.
had been too afraid of the consequences of coming forward on his own. He claimed that he had been approached to kill Diane. The offer had come through Lieutenant James Keating.
Bachman had a series of conversations with Keating, and ultimately Keating asked Bachman if Bachman would be interested in the job of actually stalking and killing Diane Masters.
Bachman said Keating offered him $25,000 to carry out the hit.
And,
Michael Corbett, the chief of police, had already agreed to dispose of the body. Bachman declined the offer.
No, sir, I'm sorry. I can't get involved in anything like that. No, no, sir.
Through Keating, Masters had clearly solicited a
straighten
murder.
up this meeting we just had in,
Well, no, but he did offer me $25,000.
This was one of the final pieces prosecutor Scorza needed to bring an indictment.
He said he wanted to eliminate her. I said, what do you mean?
What we were able to show is that when Alan Masters decided to kill his wife, he simply was able to turn to the two police officers that he'd already been working with on corrupt activities and criminal activities. And that made the homicide and the planning of it and the solicitation of it, it made it an activity of the criminal enterprise.
The pieces had finally come together.
And Diane Masters decided
Investigators put together a likely scenario of Diane Masters' murder.
said she heard something.
Alan Masters had found a hitman to kill Diane and her boyfriend when they met for the usual drinks after her college board meeting. However, Diane didn't meet with Koselniak that evening.
You're home late tonight.
Meeting ran late.
Furious, Masters took matters into his own hands.
Alan Masters was at home babysitting their young daughter. He was setting up his alibi by making long-distance calls all night to prove that he was home. He never expected his wife to walk in the door. She did. She began the process of getting undressed, and he hit her with a blunt instrument, 2 blows to the head.
Masters then called Chief Corbett, who came with an unknown accomplice to dispose of the body. They dumped Diane's body in the trunk of her Cadillac. Corbett then drove away with the accomplice following him. Masters remained at home with his daughter. They drove to the remote sanitary canal. Diane's watch was reset to throw investigators off the trail should her body ever be found. They then fired 2 shots into her head. They wanted it to look like a mob hit. They also reset the dashboard clock to 1:50. Alan Masters made sure that he was on the phone at the time to corroborate his alibi. Corbett and the accomplice dumped the Cadillac into the canal. In June of 1988, 6 years after Diane's murder, investigators brought charges against the three conspirators. Former police chief Michael Corbett was the first arrested on federal charges of racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy to solicit and cover up the murder of Diane Masters. Special Agent Ivan Harris tried to elicit a confession.
Mike Corbett subsequently confessed that he was in fact the person that had put Diane Masters' car in the canal. He disavowed any knowledge, knowing that she was in the trunk of the car at that time.
Cook County Lieutenant James Keating was arrested next on the same federal charges. He too denied involvement in Diane's murder. And finally, Alan Masters. In addition to racketeering and bribery, the indictment against Alan Masters charged that he planned, solicited, and aided and abetted the murder of his wife.
If you wish one.
Prosecutors would not have enough hard evidence to charge any of the conspirators with the actual murder of Diane. Prosecutor Tom Scorza was able to successfully tie all of their criminal activities together for the jury. Masters was convicted on all counts. Collecting the $100,000 insurance money after having his wife murdered also made him guilty of mail fraud. He received a total of 40 years, effectively, to the end of his life. Former Chief Michael Corbett received 20 years. James Keating was convicted and sentenced to over 30 years.
The Masters case was special in my experience because there was no one single piece of evidence proving guilt. What there were 1,000 little pieces that made a mosaic. That made the case intriguing. It made it very difficult to present. It made it a challenge to present to the jury, but it made a terrific story because in the end, the jury could see how one little piece from over here and one little piece from over there made a picture. And the picture was a plot among three fellows who had been involved in a lot of criminal activity to do their ultimate criminal act, murder Diane Masters.
Watch yourself.
The undercover investigation that Agent Damron oversaw, and the work of several other FBI agents, exposed a deeply rooted corruption throughout Cook County and brought it to its ultimate demise. By weeding out these pockets of corruption, the people living in the suburbs of Chicago no longer have to live with the lawlessness that threatened to destroy their community.